The elderly woman knelt beside her. "Then I'll fix it," she said with a smile. "This house has been through many storms. It won't fail us tonight." Her calmness worked like magic. The girl relaxed and leaned back against her mother. Slowly, very slowly, the storm began to change. The wind still blew hard, but the snow wasn't falling as fast. The sky outside remained dark, but there was a faint sense that the storm had reached its peak and was beginning to tire. Eventually, the elderly woman stood up again, stretching her back. "I think it's starting to settle," she said softly. Some of the passengers glanced toward the window. They couldn't see much through the thick layer of frost, but they trusted her. One of the college students asked, "Have you been in storms like this before?" She gave a soft smile. "Oh yes, many times. The land teaches you things if you listen. The snow makes its own music. When the wind changes pitch, you know the storm is shifting." Everyone stared at her with quiet admiration. She seemed to have a connection to the world outside that none of them understood. As the first light of morning slowly crept into the sky, the storm softened even more. The wind was still present but no longer screaming. The snow quieted. The house stopped shaking. Some passengers gathered their coats, preparing to check outside, but she raised a gentle hand. "Not yet," she said. "Let the wind settle, and let the light grow stronger. It's safer that way." They nodded. They trusted her completely by now, a few minutes later. As the morning light brightened, the passengers finally got a chance to peer through a small, cleared section of window. What they saw stunned them. Snow was piled almost halfway up the door. Trees were bowed under the weight. The entire hill looked like a giant white blanket had been thrown across it. It was beautiful and terrifying. The bus was nowhere in sight. It was completely swallowed by the storm. But no one panicked. Not anymore. The elderly woman stepped forward, looking out through the small patch of clear glass. Her eyes softened. "It's going to be a hard climb for rescuers to reach this place," she said quietly. "They'll have to come on foot or by snow vehicle." The driver asked gently, "Will the road be visible at all?" She shook her head. "Not for ours." The passengers exchanged looks, but instead of fear, they felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Without her, they wouldn't have survived the night. As they took in the scene outside, one of the men whispered, "We owe her everything." Another nodded. "More than we can ever repay." But none of them could imagine just how far they would go to show their gratitude, and none of them knew how deeply. Their actions would affect her because what they were, planning what they would do for her once this storm cleared. Leave the elderly woman more speechless than anything she had experienced in years. The night felt impossibly long for everyone inside the small house, even though the warmth from the fire made it feel safer than the cold world outside. No one wanted to admit it out loud, but the storm had scared them deeply. The wind shook the windows again and again, reminding them that only a few steps away was a dangerous world of snow, ice, and darkness. Yet inside there was a strange sense of peace slowly forming. Almost like the storm had created a bond among people who had never met before. Some passengers dozed off near the fire, while others tried their best to stay awake, either to keep watch or simply because the uneasy feeling in their stomach would not let them rest. Mrs. Hollis moved quietly in the little kitchen, as if trying not to disturb anyone, even though she had every right to make as much noise as she wished. After all, she had welcomed dozens of strangers into her home without hesitation. A few people who were still awake noticed how her hands trembled slightly when she poured more water into the kettle. They saw the way she paused to rest her back, as if the long night had taken more out of her than she wanted anyone to know. But when she turned around, her face always carried a calm smile, one that made people feel safe even in such frightening weather. She whispered to the driver that she would stay, awake a little longer just to make sure the fire did not die down. He nodded, feeling guilty for bringing so many people into her home, even though none of this was his fault. She simply patted his arm as if to say he should not worry about anything, then walked back to the fireplace. Time moved slowly. The storm outside showed no sign of stopping. Every hour felt like it stretched into 2. A few passengers gathered around the window, trying to see if help might be coming. But the world beyond the glass remained white and silent. Inside the house, people began quietly sharing stories to pass the time. A young man talked about heading to visit his mother, whom he had not seen in months. A woman told a soft story about how she feared storms ever since she was a child. But sitting here among others made it a little easier. A student spoke about her exams and how she worried she might miss them now. But at the same time, she admitted that nothing mattered more than everyone being safe as they talked. It became impossible not to notice how the passengers, who had earlier seemed tense and worried, now seemed more comfortable with one another. Something about being stuck in a storm inside a stranger's home made them drop the guard. They would normally keep up. Mrs. Hollis listened quietly as she worked around the house, making sure everyone had blankets, warm drinks, and a space to rest. She never interrupted the conversations, but her presence alone was enough to make everyone feel like they could speak honestly. When dawn finally approached, the wind began to soften. The loud rattling on the windows slowed until it became faint. People inside the house did not notice at first because they had grown used to the sound. It was only when one of the passengers realized the room felt slightly brighter that they understood the storm might finally be letting go. The driver stepped outside for a moment, bundled in layers, and returned with the news that the snow had stopped falling. Relief washed over the room like a warm wave. Everyone felt like they could finally breathe normally again. But the roads were still blocked by piles of thick snow, and the bus remained stuck. No one could leave yet, not until emergency crews came to clear the path. So the group waited patiently, but this time with a much lighter mood. People helped around the house to keep busy. A few men stepped outside to shovel a path from the door to the edge of the yard. A couple of women offered to help Mrs. Hollis clean up the dishes and straighten things around the house. The children who had been scared during the storm now ran around with quiet giggles, glad to stretch their legs. Mrs. Hollis at first tried to stop everyone from helping, saying they were guests, but they insisted. They saw how tired she was, how much she had done for them, and none of them wanted her to lift a finger more than necessary. She eventually agreed, though her eyes softened with gratitude each time someone handed her a clean cup or helped fold a blanket. As the morning light grew stronger, a loud engine finally broke through the quiet. Everyone ran to the window, hopeful and excited. A small convoy of emergency trucks slowly made its way down the road, clearing snow as it went. The sight filled the room with cheers and sighs of relief. Rescue workers knocked on the door a few minutes later to check if everyone was all right. They were shocked to see how many people had taken shelter inside the small house. They praised Mrs. Hollis for opening her home and caring for the passengers through such a dangerous night. She just shook her head shyly, saying anyone in her position would have done the same. Once the bus was freed from the deep snow and prepared to drive again, the passengers began gathering their things. Many of them hesitated at the door, feeling strangely reluctant to leave. They had bonded through fear, warmth, kindness, and an unexpected night they would never forget. Mrs. Hollis stood near the door, thanking each person for staying calm and being respectful in her home. The passengers, however, felt like they were the ones who should be thanking her. One by one, they expressed their gratitude, telling her how much her kindness meant to them. Some said they would never forget what she did. Others promised to send a letter or visit again if they ever passed by. The driver held her hands warmly and told her she had saved them from a night that could have ended very differently. She only smiled, brushing off the praise, saying she simply offered a warm fire and a bit of food. But inside her heart, she was deeply touched. She had lived alone for many years after losing her husband, and nights often felt long and quiet. Having so many people in her home, talking, laughing, and caring for each other, had filled her house with a warmth she had not felt in years. As the passengers finally boarded the bus and prepared to leave, Mrs. Hollis stood on her porch, watching them with a soft, peaceful smile. The sun was starting to rise higher now, casting light across the snow-covered ground. For the first time in a long while, her little home did not feel empty. She turned back inside to start cleaning up what was left from the long night. She had no idea that this morning was just the beginning, and that the passengers she helped would soon return with something she never expected. Something that would leave her completely speechless. The night began like any other winter evening, quiet and calm, with only a soft drift of snow touching the ground. No one on the bus had imagined it would turn into something dangerous. The passengers were scattered in their seats, some dozing lightly, others staring out the windows at the dark countryside. A few were chatting softly, talking about where they were headed and who they were going to meet. It was the kind of calm that made people feel safe, even on long, cold journeys. The driver kept his eyes on the road, humming now and then. He had driven this route for years and thought he knew every twist and turn, every small hill and narrow lane. The weather forecast had warned of light snowfall, nothing worth worrying about. The passengers trusted him, and he trusted the road, but the sky had other plans. The first sign of trouble was the sudden shift in the air. The temperature dropped quickly, so sharply that a few passengers rubbed their hands together without even knowing why. The windows began to fog from the inside, and the driver leaned forward, squinting as he noticed the snow starting to fall harder. It wasn't drifting down like before. It looked like it was being thrown from the sky. Within minutes, the snowstorm became fierce. The wind roared against the sides of the bus, pushing it slightly from time to time. The lights along the roadside disappeared, swallowed by the thick white curtain now falling from above. People sat up straighter, whispering questions to each other, wondering what was happening. Some pressed their faces to the glass, trying to see past the storm. The bus slowed down. The driver kept both hands tight on the wheel. He didn't want to scare anyone, but he also knew he couldn't pretend this was normal. The flakes grew heavier, smashing into the windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. It felt like the storm had come out of nowhere, as if it had been waiting in the dark for the right moment to strike. The passengers could sense the shift. Something wasn't right. A little girl sitting near the front seat tugged at her father's sleeve and whispered nervously, asking if they were going to be okay. He nodded quickly, but even he kept glancing ahead, trying to see where the road went. A group of college kids sitting in the back stopped laughing and pulled out their phones, hoping for a signal to check the weather. A middle-aged woman near the middle row closed her eyes and began to breathe slowly, trying to calm herself. The bus kept moving for a while, but each minute made it harder. The tires slipped more than once, causing a slight jolt that spread fear through the passengers. The wind was so loud that it felt like someone was pounding on the bus from all sides at once. Then it happened. The driver felt the wheels lose grip completely. The bus skidded, turning slightly as the ice below sent it sliding across the road. Gasps filled the air. Someone shouted. A child cried out in shock. The driver fought with the wheel, trying to steady the bus, but the ice was too strong. Finally, with a rough shake, the bus came to a stop-knot in the center of the road, but stuck halfway on a small slope at the side. The engine made a strained sound before going quiet. The only thing left was the howling wind. No one spoke for several seconds. Everyone sat frozen, waiting for some sign that things were okay. When the bus didn't move again, the driver turned around slowly and forced a calm voice. "It's all right, everyone. Just stay seated. I'm going to check what's going on." He didn't want them to know how worried he really was. He stepped down from his seat and opened the small door near the front to step out and look at the road. The moment he opened it, a blast of icy air rushed in, making everyone shiver. Snow flew inside before he could push the door shut again. He disappeared outside for a minute or two. When he returned, his eyebrows were covered in frost, and his expression was tight. The passengers waited. He took a breath before speaking. "The snow's too deep. The road's frozen and the bus is stuck. We'll need help to get out," some people murmured in concern. Someone in the back asked how long help would take. Someone else asked if they were in danger. The driver shook his head. "I've already tried calling for roadside support. No signal. The storm probably knocked out the towers in this area." The worry in the bus grew heavier than the snow outside. A young man tried to open a weather app on his phone, but it kept loading endlessly. An older man near the back tried texting someone, but the message wouldn't send. A mother wrapped her coat tighter around her sleeping child, rubbing the child's arms anxiously. Minutes passed. The air inside the bus felt colder. Someone suggested keeping the engine running for heat, but when the driver tried to start it again, nothing happened. The battery had been strained too much during the skid. People now realized they were stuck in the middle of nowhere. In a storm growing worse by the second, more snow clung to the windows, piling up from the outside as if trying to bury the bus. The wind rattled the metal frame, making the younger passengers look around nervously. One man near the front stood up and paced down the aisle, rubbing his hands together as he muttered about the temperature dropping. The driver tried to stay calm. Everyone just needs to stay inside. It's safer here than outside in that wind. But even he knew the cold inside was slowly rising. He could see people pulling their jackets tighter, stamping their feet to keep warm. Someone asked if there were blankets. There were only 2 emergency blankets stored in the back, meant for the driver in case of short stops. They weren't enough for everyone. A woman in a thick winter coat offered hers to shivering teenagers sitting across from her. A man took off his scarf and handed it to an elderly passenger whose hands were shaking. Strangers began helping each other quietly, trying to keep their spirits up, but hope was fading with every passing minute. Time moved slowly. Some passengers tried to distract themselves by talking softly about their families, their work, their homes. Others remained silent, thinking about the storm outside and wondering when help would come. The windows slowly iced over until only a faint glow of white could be seen. Then someone gasped. "Look," they whispered, pointing toward the front window. At first, no one else could see it. But then, as the wind shifted for a moment, a small, faint glow appeared through the thick wall of snow outside. It flickered softly, almost like a fire or a lantern. People leaned forward, trying to make sense of it. The driver narrowed his eyes and moved closer to the window. Wiping a small circle with his sleeve, the glow remained steady even though the snow whipped around it. "What is that?" someone asked. "It looks like a light," another person whispered. "It's probably nothing," someone muttered nervously. "Maybe just a reflection." But the glow looked too firm, too warm, too real. It stood out against the cold emptiness outside like a tiny promise in the darkness. The passengers felt a mix of confusion and hope. The driver opened the door slightly again to look more closely, but the snow came rushing in again, forcing him to shut it quickly. "It could be a house," he said, almost to himself. Though everyone heard him, hope flickered in their eyes. "A house?" someone repeated. "Who would live out here?" another person asked. "It doesn't matter who," someone else said quickly. "If there's a house, there might be warmth." But the storm made it impossible to see clearly. The light came and went as the wind gusted, and no one could tell exactly how far away it was. The fear of stepping outside into the storm was very real. The cold could take someone down in minutes. For a moment, no one moved. They all stared at the faint glow, wishing they could be sure of what it was. Then, suddenly, the driver saw movement. A dark shape appeared in the snow, slowly coming toward the bus. The passengers pulled back in fear at first, not sure what was heading toward them. The shape was small and hunched over. It moved with effort, pushing through the heavy snow step by step. Someone whispered nervously, "What is that?" As the figure came closer, the light behind it flickered again, revealing something surprising. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a shadow. It was a person, a very small, elderly person, bundled in heavy winter clothes, holding a lantern that swayed with each careful step. Gasps filled the bus. The figure finally reached the door and raised a gloved hand. Knocking softly, the entire bus fell silent. The driver hesitated only a second before opening the door again. A blast of cold wind rushed in, but the elderly figure stepped forward, lifting the lantern slightly so everyone could see her face. Her eyes were kind, though tired from walking through the storm. She spoke in a voice that was gentle but firm, trying to be heard over the wind. "You can't stay in there," she said. "Not in this cold. You'll all freeze. My house is just up the hill. Come with me. It's warm." The passengers stared in disbelief. No one expected someone, especially someone her age, to be out in this kind of weather. The driver looked at her with surprise. "Ma'am, it's dangerous out here. You shouldn't be walking in this storm." She shook her head. "It's more dangerous for you inside that metal box." The temperature will keep dropping. You must come now. All of you." The passengers exchanged uncertain looks. Some were afraid to leave the bus. Others feared staying inside even more. The elderly woman seemed to understand their hesitation. She lifted the lantern a little higher, letting its warm glow touch their faces. "I've lived here for many years," she said softly. "The storm will get worse before it gets better. If you stay, you won't last long. Please, trust me." Her voice carried a kind of quiet strength, a sort that comes from someone who has seen many storms and survived them. Finally, the driver nodded. He looked back at the passengers. "Everyone needs to move together. We'll walk in a line. Stay close to her light," no one argued. They knew it was their only real chance. People stood up, gathering their few belongings, wrapping themselves in whatever coats and scarves they had. Some helped older passengers. Others carried sleeping children in their arms. The bus door opened wide. The cold rushed in once again, but this time they didn't shy away, because now they had a guide. One by one, they stepped out into the storm, the wind hitting their faces like sharp needles. But the elderly woman held the lantern high, its glow steady and warm, and as they followed her through the deepening snow, the passengers didn't know yet that this night, this storm, this stranger, this rescue would change everything about the days that followed. The wind screamed across the hillside as the group stepped off the bus, each breath turning into a cloud of white mist that vanished into the storm. The snow was falling so heavily it felt like walking through a wall of feathers. But these feathers were cold enough to sting any skin left uncovered. The passengers held on to each other, moving carefully through the thick snowdrifts that reached almost up to their knees. The elderly woman walked at the front, holding her lantern high. The soft yellow light barely cut through the storm, but it was enough to show where she was stepping. Each slow, steady step seemed to carve a small path for the others to follow. Though her frame was small, she moved with surprising strength, as if she had walked this hill in every kind of weather for many years. Behind her, the driver guided the passengers into a single-file line. He made sure none of the older passengers fell behind. A young man held a sleeping child close to his chest, shielding the little one from the icy wind. A woman near the back kept calling softly to her teenage son, checking if he was still right behind her. Everyone moved slowly, carefully, with the storm pushing against their bodies. The bus, now half buried behind them, disappeared into the blur of white within seconds. It was strange and scary to think they had just been inside that metal box moments ago. Now it felt like a faraway place. The world around them was colder, harsher, completely unfamiliar. The elderly woman looked back now and then to make sure everyone was following her. When she saw them struggling, she stopped for a moment, pointing toward the hill ahead. "Not much farther," she called out, her voice soft but steady. "Just a little more. Keep close." Her reassurance helped more than she knew. A middle-aged man who had been quietly panicking inside. The bus now took a deep breath and kept his steps slow and steady. A college student who had never seen a winter storm this strong whispered to her friend that they just needed to keep moving. Everyone told themselves the same thing. The snow kept rising. The wind kept screaming, but the lantern glowed on. After a few minutes, someone near the middle whispered, "I think I see something." Others squinted through the swirling snow. There, faint but real, was the outline of a roof, then a chimney, then a fence. Soon, the shape of a small house appeared, tucked against the hillside like it was hiding from the storm. Warmth, safety, shelter. The thought of it gave everyone a small burst of strength. The elderly woman reached the gate first. She pushed it open with effort. The snow had piled high against it, but it opened just enough for the passengers to slip through one by one. The house stood only a few steps away now. A lantern hung near the door, glowing softly and giving the whole place a warm, welcoming look despite the blizzard. She rushed ahead to open the door wide. A wave of warm air immediately rushed out, carrying the soft smell of burning wood. "Come in, all of you," she said gently. "Hurry, before the cold gets to you." The passengers didn't need to be told twice. They filed inside quickly, brushing snow from their coats and shaking off the cold from their hands. The warmth hit their faces and brought a relief so deep, some of them nearly cried. The inside of the house was simple but cozy. A big stone fireplace glowed in the corner with flames crackling brightly. A few thick blankets were folded on a rocking chair nearby. The furniture was old but clean. There were pictures on the walls, knitted rugs on the floor, and shelves full of jars, books, and small handcrafted items. It felt like stepping into a different world. The elderly woman stepped in last, closed the door behind her. She set her lantern on a small table and brushed the snow from her coat, smiling warmly at the group. "Please, everyone sit where you can," she said kindly. "The floor is warmer near the fire, but the chairs are sturdy too." People began taking off their coats, rubbing their hands together to bring some feeling back into their fingers. Some sat on the couches, some on the floor, and a few remained standing, trying to help others get settled. The driver approached the woman and said, "Thank you. Really, thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come." She waved a hand softly. "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same. You were right there on the road. I couldn't just watch." He wanted to tell her that not everyone would have walked out into a storm like that, especially someone her age, but he didn't want to embarrass her. Instead, he helped her hang up her coat. She moved carefully to the kitchen area and filled a big kettle with water. "I'll make some warm tea for everyone," she said. "It'll help bring back your warmth." One of the passengers, a young woman with a calm face, stood up. "Let me help you," she said. The elderly woman smiled. "If you don't mind, dear, the cupboards can be a bit high for me now." With that, the two of them began preparing tea, hot water, and simple food. Others got up to help too, some cutting bread, some arranging mugs, and some helping to find extra blankets. The house filled with soft movement, the kind that comes when people are trying their best to help without causing trouble. Despite everything they had been through, passengers found themselves working together like they had known each other for a long time. In a corner, a man gently placed a blanket over an elderly passenger who was still shivering. A mother tucked another one around her child. Two college students sat near the fire, holding their hands out to the flames. The room slowly warmed, not just in temperature, but in feeling. After a few minutes, the elderly woman returned from the kitchen holding a tray full of steaming mugs. "Drink slowly," she said as she handed them out. "It'll warm you from the inside." The passengers took the mugs gratefully, wrapping their hands around them and breathing in the warmth. A hush fell over the room as everyone took their first sips. For a moment, no one spoke. The tea was simple, just herbs and dried leaves, but it tasted like comfort. Eventually, someone asked her gently, "Do you live here alone?" She nodded with a small smile. "Yes, dear. Been here many years. I like the quiet. And the storms don't bother me much anymore. You learn to expect them when you've lived here long enough." A young man looked around the room, noticing pictures on the wall. "Is that your family?" She followed his gaze and nodded. "My husband long gone now. My son moved to the city. Life keeps people busy. So it's mostly just me here." She said it without sadness, just as a simple fact. The passengers listened quietly. They didn't want to pry. They sensed she valued her peace, yet she welcomed them with such warmth. Soon, she began bringing out more things, extra sweaters she had knitted long ago. Old blankets, and even warm socks she kept stored in a wooden chest. Every time she brought something new, people felt touched by how much she was giving. An older man sitting by the fire said softly, "You're giving away all your things to strangers. That's a lot to do." She shook her head with a gentle smile. "Things can be replaced. People cannot." Those words sat quietly in the air, warming hearts as much as the fire, as the passengers settled deeper into the comfort of the small house. Someone asked, "Did you notice us right away? How did you know we were there in the storm?" She chuckled lightly. "I check the window when the wind howls like that. You can tell a lot by the way snow falls. When I saw something dark against the white, I knew it wasn't normal. Took my lantern and went to see." The driver added softly, "You saved us. I don't know how else to say it." She touched his arm lightly. You all saved yourselves by listening and staying together. Sometimes that's all anyone needs to do. Outside, the storm grew louder. The wind pushed against the windows like it wanted to get inside. But the house stood firm, holding everyone safely. Inside, the fire crackled softly, and the passengers began to relax for the first time since the storm started. One of the children, now awake, wandered near the fireplace and stared at the flames with sleepy eyes. "Is this your home always?" he asked the elderly woman in a small voice. She knelt beside him. "Yes, dear. It may be small, but it keeps me warm." She tucked a blanket around his shoulders, and the child leaned into her in the corner of the room. A group of college students whispered about how amazing it was that she had walked out in the blizzard. "She must be stronger than she looks," one of them said. "Stronger than any of us," another replied. As the night stretched on, the passengers found themselves sharing small stories, fun memories. Favorite foods, plans they had for the weekend, things to keep the room filled with life and warmth. The elderly woman listened, smiling at their stories. At one point, she looked around the room and said softly, "It's been a long time since this house had this much company." "It's nice." The passengers smiled back. They had been rescued, but somehow it felt like she was grateful for something too. The storm showed no signs of stopping. Snow piled higher outside the door. The windows shook whenever the wind roared. But inside, the group stayed warm, wrapped in blankets, sipping tea, and listening to the crackling fire. After a long stretch of silence, someone whispered, "What if the storm lasts all night?" The elderly woman responded gently, "Then you will stay here all night. There is room, and I'll make more tea." Those simple words calmed everyone more than they expected. As the night deepened further, some passengers began to doze off, their heads resting on shoulders or folded blankets. Others stayed awake, watching the flames dance. The elderly woman sat in her rocking chair, humming softly, keeping watch over them all like a quiet guardian. Outside, the snowstorm raged. Inside, the warmth held strong. None of the passengers knew it yet. But this night, the rescue, the kindness, the warmth of a stranger would leave a mark on their hearts long after the storm was over. And the way they would repay her kindness later would leave her completely speechless. The storm continued to roar through the night as if it had no intention of slowing down. Snow slammed against the windows with a force that made a few passengers flinch every time the wind howled louder than before. But inside the small house, everything felt strangely peaceful. The fire crackled softly, casting warm golden light across the walls and creating dancing shadows that moved gently along the floor. People seemed to breathe a little easier here, even though the danger outside was still very real. Some passengers had fallen asleep, stretched out on blankets, or leaning against each other on the couches. Others stayed awake, watching the fire or whispering quietly, so they wouldn't disturb those resting. There was a calmness in the room now, a softness that none of them had felt back on the bus. The elderly woman sat in her rocking chair, gently rocking back and forth. The creaking sound of the chair was soft and comforting, almost like a lullaby. She watched the passengers with a peaceful expression, her hands resting in her lap. Every now and then, she would stand up slowly and walk around to check if anyone needed another blanket or a warmer seat near the fire. After a while, a man sitting near the hearth spoke quietly. "Ma'am, you've done so much for us already. You must be tired." She shook her head lightly. "I'm fine, dear. I've stayed up through many storms. And tonight, I don't mind keeping watch." A woman seated nearby smiled. "Still, you're taking care of so many people at once. That's not easy." The elderly woman looked around the room and gave a warm smile. "When you live alone for a long time, you learn to enjoy it when others are around. You all being here, it feels nice." Her words made several people smile, and one man nodded gratefully. "We're lucky we found you." She only waved her hand gently. It wasn't luck. The storm always shows you something if you're paying attention. As the night went on, the storm actually grew stronger. Snow piled higher outside, an icy wind slid through the cracks in the door despite the towel she had placed along the bottom. A few passengers shifted uneasily as the wind began rattling the house, but she reassured them each time. "This house has stood through storms much worse than this," she said calmly. "It's solid. You're safe." Her confidence made everyone feel better. It was as though her presence alone was enough to fight off the fear creeping around the edges of the room. Eventually, one of the younger passengers, a college student who had been sitting near the fire, turned to her and asked, "How do you stay so calm? Most people would be scared." She chuckled softly. "Oh, I've been scared plenty of times in my life. But fear doesn't do much except make you cold faster. I've learned that the best thing to do is breathe, stay warm, and move when you can." She took a seat again, her eyes drifting toward one of the framed photographs on the wall. "My husband used to say that storms always pass. They may shake you, frighten you, and leave you tired, but they pass." There was a silence, then soft and respectful. No one wanted to push further. Her eyes softened, though with a kind of warmth that made the room even cozier. As hours passed, people began talking more freely. Perhaps it was the shared experience, or maybe it was the warmth of the house making their fears smaller. The passengers formed small circles of conversation, sharing stories from their lives. One man talked about his job and how he was heading home after weeks of being away. A mother spoke gently about her children and how she wished she had brought warmer clothes for them. The college students chatted about their classes, laughing quietly about funny things that had happened on campus. The elderly woman listened with interest. She laughed softly at their jokes and nodded sadly at their struggles. Her presence made everyone feel like they were sitting in the living room of someone who had known them forever at one point. The driver stood up and approached her. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I'm still trying to figure out how you managed to walk through that storm. It was barely possible for us to stand in it." She gave a small shrug. "When you know the land, the storm is less frightening. I know every stone on that hill. I've walked it since I was young. I couldn't leave you sitting there. That bus didn't look safe." The driver looked down at the floor, humbled. "I still can't believe you came out for us." "That must have been so dangerous." Her voice softened. "Sometimes the right thing is dangerous, but you don't stop doing it. Not if someone needs help." A quiet hush filled the room for a moment. The passengers looked at her with newfound admiration. She didn't speak loudly or dramatically. She didn't brag about what she'd done. She simply lived by a quiet strength that everyone could feel. After a little while, she stood up again. "I should make something to eat," she said, heading toward the kitchen. "Tea is good, but you all need something warm in your bellies." A few passengers jumped up to help her. "No, no, sit down," she insisted gently. "You're all tired." But they refused. "You shouldn't do everything alone," one woman said, but she smiled softly. "I'm used to it, dear. But if it helps you feel better, you can hand me things from the pantry." The kitchen warmed up with soft conversation as more people moved around, helping her find pots, bowls, and ingredients. She began preparing a large pot of warm broth. The smell drifted into the living room, filling the house with a comforting aroma that made several stomachs growl. People gathered around, some sitting at the kitchen table, others leaning against the counter. They watched as she cooked with practiced hands, slow, careful, but steady. She chopped vegetables with a small knife and added them to the pot. She stirred gently, humming softly as she worked. A young man asked, "Is this something you cook often?" "Oh yes," she replied. "My husband loved this broth. And when my son was young, he used to say it was the only thing that made him feel warm after coming home in the snow." Her eyes glowed softly with the memory. When the broth was ready, she asked everyone to bring their mugs. She filled them one by one, making sure every single person got something warm to eat. The passengers sat quietly, savoring the warm broth. A few smiled as they tasted it. "This is amazing," one of them said. She laughed gently. "Just something simple. But simple things keep you alive in the cold." The house relaxed again. The storm still screamed outside, but inside, the warmth held them safely. Hours passed. Some slept. Some talked quietly. Some simply watched the fire burn. Sometime before dawn, a loud crack echoed outside. The passengers jumped, startled. A few scrambled to their feet. What was that? Someone whispered. The elderly woman remained calm. Don't worry. Probably a tree branch breaking under the snow. Happens often during heavy storms. The passengers tried to calm themselves. But the storm wasn't done with them yet. Soon after the crack, the house shook slightly as a strong gust of wind slammed into it. Snow dust sprinkled down from the ceiling beams. A baby started crying softly, and the mother held the child close. The driver approached the door, checking the latch. The wind's getting worse, he said. The elderly woman nodded. We'll stay inside until it passes. The house is strong, but the hill. It'll be too dangerous to walk until morning. The passengers understood. They were staying here, whether they wanted to or not. Near the fire, a young girl shifted worriedly. What if the door breaks? She whispered. The days after the storm passed quietly for Mrs. Hollis. Her home, which had been full of voices, footsteps, and warm laughter just a short while ago, returned to its familiar stillness. She moved slowly around the house, folding blankets the riders had used, cleaning the cups they had held in their hands. In checking the fireplace where they had all gathered through the night, every small item felt touched by a memory. The soft scarf one of the passengers had dropped near the door. The wooden stool that a child had used to sit close to the fire. The empty jars she had used for soup, lined up now on the kitchen shelf. It was strange how a single night could fill her home with so much life and then leave it silent. Again, she didn't feel lonely, not in the sad way she sometimes felt during long winter evenings, but rather thoughtful. She kept replaying the night in her mind, surprised at how naturally she had welcomed everyone in. She hadn't planned it. She hadn't even hesitated. She had simply seen people in need and acted. 2 days passed peacefully. The sun melted some of the heavy snow. The roads were now mostly clear. Mrs. Hollis spent part of her morning organizing her pantry and clearing the small path in front of her door. She didn't expect any visitors. After all, the passengers were likely back in their own busy lives. But on the third morning, she heard a noise outside, voices, many of them. She paused, holding a cup halfway to the sink, unsure if she was imagining it. When she peeked through the window, she saw a large group of people walking up her snowy driveway. She wiped her hands quickly on her apron and hurried to the door, her heart beating a little faster. When she opened it, she found herself staring at familiar faces, faces she had thought she would never see again. It was the passengers. The same people she had sheltered during the storm stood in front of her now, smiling, waving, and calling her name with warmth that made her eyes sting. They weren't alone either. Behind them were workers carrying boxes, tools, and supplies. We wanted to come back, one of the men said warmly. We didn't want to leave everything the way it was. You helped us when we needed it, so we thought we could help you too. Mrs. Hollis looked around in confusion as several workers began unloading items from trucks. One carried a toolbox. Another carried bags of food. A few others held new blankets and cleaning supplies. She felt her breath catch. Oh my. You didn't need to do any of this. We wanted to. A woman from the group said gently. You opened your home to all of us. You gave what you had without even thinking about yourself. We couldn't just walk away like nothing happened. Before Mrs. Hollis could say another word, a pair of workers politely asked if they could inspect her roof. They explained that someone in the group had noticed how the shingles were worn and that the storm had probably made them worse. Another worker asked if they could check her heating system as well. Saying they had brought the equipment to repair anything that needed fixing, she stood there on her porch, overwhelmed. Unable to process how quickly everything was happening, the passengers began carrying boxes into her house, filling her small kitchen with groceries, fresh vegetables, canned food, tea, honey, and even baked goods from a local bakery. Someone had brought her a new kettle. Someone else brought warm boots in her size. One woman gently placed a handmade quilt on the table and said she had sewn it herself as a thank-you. Mrs. Hollis felt something warm rise in her chest, a feeling she couldn't name. She had spent years doing things quietly, rarely receiving anything in return. Giving was part of who she was. But receiving, especially in such a huge way, felt almost impossible to believe. When she stepped outside to take a breath, she noticed more workers climbing careful steps along the side of her house, repairing the damaged gutter. Others were clearing leftover heavy snow from her roof and driveway. The passengers gathered around her. Some hugged her. Others held her hands. A few of them had tears in their eyes as they thanked her again and again. One young man, who had barely spoken during the night of the storm, stepped forward. He reached into his pocket and handed her an envelope. "This is something we all contributed to," he said. "We wanted to show you how much your kindness changed things for us." Mrs. Hollis opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a letter and a check knot. A small one, but an amount that made her knees weaken. She almost dropped it from shock. "What? What is this?" She whispered. "It's for you," the young man replied softly. "To help with whatever you need, repairs, bills, groceries, anything. We also set up a small online fundraiser. People loved your story. They wanted to support you too." Mrs. Hollis brought a hand to her mouth. She had never imagined anything like this. She had helped them because it was the right thing to do, not because she expected something in return. She didn't even know people still did such big things for one another. Her eyes filled with tears, but not the heavy kind that came from loss or loneliness. These were warm tears, soft, grateful, full of emotion she hadn't let herself feel in years. She stepped closer to the group and whispered, "I don't know what to say. I never thought." She stopped, unable to finish her sentence. "You don't have to say anything," one of the passengers said gently. "We just wanted to make sure you knew how much you mattered to us." The workers continued fixing up her home for hours. They replaced weak parts of the roof, repaired her heating system, fixed her back door, and even cleaned the yard where the snow had piled up dangerously. The passengers stayed with her the entire time, helping where they could, laughing together, sharing warm drinks she offered them. For the first time in a long while, the house felt alive again, not because people needed shelter, but because people wanted to be there. The sound of chatter filled the rooms. The kitchen was full of warmth. The porch was full of footprints. Her home felt like it belonged to a community, not just one woman. When the repairs were finally done and the workers packed up, the passengers gathered for one final moment before they left. They stood in a loose circle around her, smiling gently. "We hope we didn't overwhelm you," one of them said. Mrs. Hollis laughed softly, wiping her tears. "You overwhelmed me in the best way. I never imagined anything like this. I just did what anyone should do in a storm." "Maybe," a passenger replied, "but not everyone does it. And that's why it mattered so much." The group slowly began to say their goodbyes. Some hugged her again. Others promised to visit when they passed through town. A few exchanged mailing addresses with her so they could stay in touch. Before they walked down the driveway, a little girl who had been frightened during the storm ran up to Mrs. Hollis and wrapped her arms around her waist. "Thank you for keeping us safe," the girl whispered. Mrs. Hollis held her close, her heart full in a way she couldn't describe. When the last of the passengers finally left and the trucks rolled away, she stood alone on her porch again. But this time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. It felt peaceful. Her home was warmer, her roof stronger, her pantry stocked, but more than anything, her heart felt repaired. She walked inside, closing the door gently behind her. She looked at the new quilt on the table, the fresh food on the counter, the repaired window letting in soft winter light. She whispered to herself, "People are still good," she knew. She would remember this moment for the rest of her life, the day the kindness she gave returned to her in a way she never expected, leaving her speechless and forever changed.